Well, my dream, which hasn't exactly happened yet, is that there is Hispanic and Latino movies and TV shows that have Hispanic and Latino people behind the scenes, and that are successes creatively and commercially. I think that's the dream, right? To make really good stuff that connects with people of all races. But what I want to see is that the stuff in front of the camera matches the stuff in the back of the camera. I don't think there's enough Latina writers. I don't think there's enough Latino directors. I don't think there's enough of the choice makers in studios making the green lights happen. So I want to see diversity everywhere, not just in front of the camera, but behind the scenes. As a director, I can tell you, uh, I honestly don't know any other Mexican directors doing animation. So that's kind of crazy. Uh, we're a pretty big industry. I can't be the only one. So I'm excited to see who's the next Latina director. I want to see Asian American directors and African American directors, and you know, sort of. I want to see all of us making these movies. And a lot of the movies that I've seen in the past deal with other cultures, especially the Disney movies. But the people behind the scenes aren't from those cultures. So I want to see that. That's my dream. So the thing I'm going to do now after Book of Life is going to be a virtual reality short for Google Spotlight Stories. And it's about Mexican wrestling. And what I'm excited, the thing I'm most excited about is that you're going to put the goggles on and I'm going to make you Mexican. So characters are going to speak to you in Spanish and you're going to see subtitles underneath. And hopefully by the time you take your goggles off, you'll have grown a mustache, especially the ladies. So that's the plan. El Tigre was the first Flash show at Nickelodeon, and I've always worked on the first Flash shows. I was on the first Flash show at Warner Brothers called Mucha Lucha. I was on the first Flash show at Disney called The Buzz on Maggie, and then El Tigre was the first one. And El Tigre won 7 Emmys, so it was kind of a big deal how well that show was received critically. After El Tigre, I've always wanted to make Book of Life. I mean, I pitched Book of Life right out of school, and every studio told me, you're just some dumb kid out of school. We're not going to let you do a movie. So after El Tigre wins all those awards, then lots of doors opened, and then they said, hey, do you have a movie idea? And I brought out the exact document, literally the exact document from when I was a student, ripped the first page off, put a new page with today's date, and they said, this is great. So that's basically how Book of Life happened. But I came from 3D when I was in school. I did CG 3D animation, I did stop motion, and I did 2D. And so El Tigre was 2D, Book of Life is CG 3D. And so it was a kind of a natural transition for me to return to that world. Now, after, when all your dreams come true, you got to come up with new dreams. So my dream of making a TV show and then my dream of making a movie happened. Now I want to explore new mediums. So I'm going to jump into virtual reality. I'm terrified of it, which is a good sign. And then after that, I want to do miniseries. I want to something I could never do before. And so I'm kind of excited. I think we're in the golden era of animation. I mean, it took 14 years from when I had my outline to the movie coming out. And so it was one of those dream things that I would just work on the side. And I remember at some point I thought, well, no one's going to make it. I'll just do a graphic novel. But I'm going to get this story out somehow. And then eventually the movie was at DreamWorks Animation for a year. And we had creative differences. And it didn't go so well. And then after the movie left that studio, Jeffrey Katzenberg, who I'm very thankful to, said, you can have all your rights back because we can't make that movie, but I want to see it one day. And so a studio in Dallas called Real Effects, an independent studio, said, we don't have the budget of a DreamWorks, but we'll give you the creative freedom to make something this weird and this unique. And so we worked on the movie for a year, and after a year, they said, now we need a big name producer to help us find funding. Who would be your dream producer? And like pretty much every Mexican kid in the world, I said, Guillermo del Toro. And it took a long time to convince him, and it took a lot of pitching to get his attention, and finally he fell in love with the movie, and then he became a producer. And at that point I thought, everybody's going to want to make the movie. And that was not the case. We still got a lot of no's everywhere. And eventually 20th Century Fox said, we'll co-finance it and distribute it. But it was 14 years is a long time. What's weird with me is I was born in Mexico and I was raised in Mexico. And then I came to the U.S. when I came here to go to college. So I didn't grow up a minority. I grew up basically a Mexican person in Mexico, and I would see American movies and I would see Japanese movies and European movies, and I would go, where are the Mexican movies? Why don't I see myself on the screen? Why is that happening? And so when I came here, I thought, well, just like in Mexico, where we accept movies from different parts of the world, why can't I make movies that look like me? And why can't I make TV shows that look like me? And so that became my mission. Because growing up, honestly, I would watch Star Wars and I would go, well, I guess Latinos didn't make it. Because there's no Latinos in space. Like, that was it, right? We didn't, I remember joking, like, maybe Chewbacca is Mexican. Because I know lots of Chewies. So it became sort of my mission to try to get a reflection of my family and a reflection of people that I grew up with and me. And honestly, for my kid now who's here in the U.S., to see himself on the screen, I've always said Mexican food has been the way that Mexico has enamored itself with the U.S. And so if Americans are okay eating Mexican food, maybe they'll be okay consuming Hispanic movies and Hispanic TV shows. And so that's been kind of my mission. Early on, I was rejected pretty much everywhere. No one wanted to make this type of stuff. And I was just told very, very blunt things. Americans don't want to see this stuff. The audience here is not interested. Hispanic audiences in the U.S. are okay not seeing themselves. This actually was said to me by a studio executive. And I kept thinking, well, at some point, someone has to make some of this stuff. And it's gonna be me because I'm not giving up. And so I just kept doing it and kept doing it. And eventually the no's turned into maybes. And honestly, the biggest change is the population. There's so many Hispanic people in the U.S. and there's so many, now it's an amount that's so big that studios cannot ignore this audience anymore. And so now they're going, well, we gotta make stuff that sort of appeases this part of the population. Who can make that stuff? And so I'm the one guy who was there knocking at the door, 20 years ago. So now all these opportunities are coming my way. You hit on something that I feel very strongly about, which is I think adults have made up their mind about the world. It's very hard to change an adult's mind. But I think kids, especially in the world we live in, which is the animation world, kids are still making up their version of what the world is. And I take a huge responsibility as a filmmaker and as an artist to present a different point of view, to inform kids of other views. Because the way you learn about yourself is to learn about other cultures, right? That's what happens in cities when you're living with people from different places. You learn a lot about who you are. You learn about what the world is, what the world is outside of where you're from. And I think that's a huge part of what I considered a balanced view of the world. And so I think it's our responsibility, people like me who are not the majority, to show a view of other places and other cultures. And I truly believe this, it gives kids a glimpse of the whole world and it makes their point of view a lot more open. Honestly, for me growing up, my parents would travel a lot. And the more I traveled, the more I fell in love with Mexico. And the more I traveled, the more I realized, wow, there's a lot of similarities, like in other countries with what we do. Wow, and there's some really big differences. But at the end of the day, the love I have for my mom is the same love another kid in any part of the world has for their mom. Like, I saw the differences and the things that were completely exactly the same, even though we spoke different languages, social classes were different, faith and religions were different, terrain, but at the same way we were similar. So that really informed my view. What's been interesting, and I talked about it a little bit in my panel, my first experience in animation was shocking to me in that I showed up 2 hours early to my first job at Sony, and I went to the cafeteria, and the cook yelled at me and said, this is 6 o'clock in the morning. He yelled at me and he said, "What are you doing here? Janitorial services are supposed to be here at 5." And it was because he'd never seen a Hispanic animator. And so that was the first sort of jolting, like, whoa, I guess I am the first Hispanic animator here. And so that was a big deal to me. And then instead of making me angry or making me sad, I talked to the guy afterwards and I'm like, "Hey man, I'm an animator." And he was obviously horrified, but he had no idea. He literally was like, I didn't know you guys could do that stuff. And so, that's in my mind, that's how we make progress, by not confronting the conflicts by being aggressive, but by informing people. And so for me, that's been sort of my journey. And the other weird thing for me has always been, I was taught your culture will be your weakness. If you keep trying to make stuff about your culture, you're never going to get a job. And I remember just whenever I would get rejected, I would say, no, I'm going to make the thing that they thought was my weakness, I'm going to make it my strength. And I'm just going to keep at it. I'm going to be so stubborn about getting my stuff out there that it will work. And obviously I had doubts, and there were moments where I was really, really, really broken by rejection. But at the end of the day, I would always say, it's not like anybody died. Worst thing that can happen to me is someone says no. And eventually, the no's turn to maybes. Oh, it feels, honestly, here at CTN, I've met so many people who've been affected by the stuff we did on El Tigre and Book of Life. And not just in the way that I would hope as an audience to be affected by it, but on the story behind the making of it. Like someone from a different culture bringing their ideas, being supported by a studio, and getting them up on the screen. Like there's a whole history behind these movies and TV shows that is filled with rejection. Absolutely. Well, when I grew up, I lived in museums. My parents would just take us all the time. And so when I was looking for inspiration, I couldn't look at cartoons or animation because there were no Mexican artists. So I had to look at museums and painters and books. And then eventually, now I get a ton, which I love, a ton of emails from people from all Latin America and the US asking me for advice. And Guillermo del Toro helped me out, and he said, you have to remember I helped you, so now it's your turn to help the next generation. And so I take it very seriously. And so I go out of my way to try to help people. I'm always asking, send me your stuff, send me a link to your work. It's going to take me a while, but I'm going to review everything and I'm going to give you advice. And I love finding people and hiring them to help them out, especially if they've never had a shot. I feel like someone gave me a shot, so I owe it to them. And so I try to give people shots. Oh yeah, I go out of my way. It's been tough because there's not as many Hispanic artists in the studio systems with experience. So it's really, really tough. And that happened to me on El Tigre too. I said, I want to have at least one Latino writer in the writer's room. We couldn't find a single one. So it's just, there no Latinos were writing, so there was no Latino writers. And that was that. So it was kind of shocking to me that because there were no opportunities, people stopped trying. Absolutely. I see it now. What's happened now, what I'm seeing in the entertainment industry is money drives everything. And because that audience is now sort of requesting to see themselves, and it's so monetarily powerful, they have no choice. So now they're starting to make things that have a Latino character, here and there, or deal with Latino culture. It's one of those things where, for some reason, there's Spanish language channels, and they thought, well, that's that. We don't have to service that audience. But there's a lot of people of that culture that don't even speak Spanish that are going, where am I on, any of the shows that are airing right now? And of course there are exceptions. But now you're starting to see shows where the ethnicity is not a character, right? A show like Modern Family with Sofia Vergara, like that's as awesome as that show is, and as amazing as Sofia Vergara is. It's kind of a caricature of the culture. Now you're starting to see shows where being Hispanic is not the character; they just happen to be of the culture, and I think to me that's progress. This has been awesome.
Yeah,
By the way, this is like the deepest questions I've been asked in years.